right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Hamilton, and as always, I'm delighted to have your company with me once again. Today's episode is all about knowing your enemy and learning to identify threats well ahead of time so that we can mount a sufficient response to deal with them. And to do that, we're going to use an example from history, a company called Blockbuster, which has just dawned on me. Many of you might not even be old enough to fully recall who they were and what they did. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. Blockbuster were a brick and mortar DVD rental service. So you'd rock up to Blockbuster on a Thursday or a Friday night. You'd choose the movies that you wanted to watch over the weekend, and then you would return them at a later date. They were an absolutely massive force in the corporate world in the 90s and even the early 2000s. But their tale is one that is very applicable to today's episode. So let's get started. In the late 1990s, Blockbuster was the undisputed king of video rentals. With thousands of stores around the world, it seemed as though nothing could topple the giant. In a world where VHS tapes and DVDs ruled, Blockbuster was a cultural force. People would line up on Friday nights to rent the latest films. It seemed like the company was untouchable. But in 1997, a small startup named Netflix was born, founded by Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. Netflix initially operated as a DVD rental by mail service, and in its early years, it was an afterthought in the entertainment world. However, Reed Hastings had a vision that would change the entire landscape of the industry. He saw that the future of movie rentals wasn't going to be in brick and mortar stores, but online, and specifically in streaming. By the year 2000, Netflix was still a young company, but it was growing rapidly. Hastings recognized that Blockbuster, with its massive reach and resources, could help Netflix scale even faster. So Hastings made a bold move. He reached out to Blockbuster's CEO, John Antioco, and he suggested a partnership. In a meeting, Hastings pitched a very simple idea, and that was that Blockbuster could acquire Netflix for $50 million, giving them a foothold in the growing online rental space. Hastings knew that partnering with Blockbuster could help Netflix tap into its massive customer base and provide the infrastructure for Netflix's future. But Antioco wasn't interested. Blockbuster, at the time, was still firmly entrenched in its model, which was physical rental stores. The idea of an online service was foreign, even laughable to him. He believed that Blockbuster was invincible and that people would always want to rent movies in person. In his mind, Netflix was a niche business with limited potential. He couldn't fathom that the future of video consumption would be driven by the internet. Antioco's rejection of Hastings' proposal was more than just a missed opportunity. It was a sign of his inability to see the bigger picture and to understand the broader trends shaping the future of entertainment. He didn't recognize the relentless drive that Hastings had to innovate, nor did he grasp the technological shifts that were rapidly taking place in the world of media. Where Antioco saw Netflix as a small competitor, Hastings saw an industry-changing force. While Blockbuster continued to focus on its physical stores and the immediate profit from its DVD rentals, Netflix began its transformation. Hastings' vision was clear. Netflix would eventually become a streaming service. The company worked tirelessly to develop its platform, and by 2007, Netflix had launched its streaming service. As internet speeds improved and digital content consumption grew, Netflix was perfectly positioned to take advantage of this new era. Blockbuster, however, remained stuck in its old ways, and by the time they realized the digital revolution was happening, it was far too late. Their attempts to create an online rental service came too late to compete with Netflix, which had already established itself as the leader in streaming. While Blockbuster's name became synonymous with obsolescence, Netflix exploded in popularity, eventually transforming from a DVD rental service into one of the world's largest entertainment companies. Looking back, the story of Blockbuster's downfall and Netflix's rise is a tale of missed opportunities and misjudgments. Had Blockbuster understood Reed Hastings' vision, they might have seen the writing on the wall, the digital future that was coming, and embraced it. But Antioco and the rest of the leadership at Blockbuster failed to understand the potential of Netflix and the broader shifts happening in the industry. The rejection of Netflix, once a small competitor, would go on to become one of the most disastrous business decisions in history. It wasn't just a matter of rejecting a partnership, it was a failure to understand who they were dealing with, a visionary entrepreneur who had a clear sense of where the industry was heading. Blockbuster's inability to grasp this and its failure to adapt ultimately led to the company's collapse and paved the way for Netflix to revolutionize the way the world consumes entertainment. Now, isn't that a lesson that is just so applicable to the concept of knowing your enemy and being able to pivot to adjust and respond accordingly? And this doesn't just apply at the big sort of corporation level, those big strategic levels. It applies at all different levels to us as people leaders. I've written down a couple of things that I thought would be really beneficial to go through by way of example. So, for example, as a leader, we've got to fiercely guard our team culture. Culture is everything. I think people think that once the culture is set, it doesn't need to be maintained. Quite the opposite. All right, if you work hard to set a team culture, you've got to work even harder to make sure that that culture is maintained, because all it takes is one disruptive individual to come into that team, and people tend to fall to the lowest common denominator. Rather than rising, they tend to fall. So one person who is a little bit toxic in your team can be incredibly disruptive and damaging to your team culture. So that is something that we need to be aware of from a threat mitigation perspective, just to bring it down to that sort of personal leadership space so that you guys can relate to this example, right? Then you've got other things that are quite relevant in the operational sphere. You've got single points of failure. In your team, is there one person who, if they were to leave, the whole place would fall apart because nobody is able to do their job? Do they guard information really closely? Do they keep things close to their chest and not like to share because they like to be that indisposable person on whom everything depends? That is a threat, and that is something that needs to be addressed. It's a single point of failure. If they leave, if they happen to take unplanned sick leave for any period of time, those things come back to bite. So we need to be aware of threats in that space as well. Let's explore another one on the personal level. It might be coming into a new organization, or perhaps dealing with a new person that you're not very familiar with, and you haven't done your homework. You haven't sat back, as we've discussed in previous episodes, and gotten to know the person and who they are. And in fact, what you've done is, before you've got to know who they are or how influential they are, maybe you've said something a little bit too soon. Maybe you've spoken too soon to them, and then had you known more about that person, the influence they have and who they are, you perhaps wouldn't have said whatever it was you said. That's a great example of, not being patient and aware with respect to threats and the threat landscape. Patience, sitting back, watching, being tactful. And then we've got another personal example that is worth considering, and that is identifying resume gaps in your own personal resume. Maybe it's identifying skills and weaknesses, not only for you personally that you need to work on, but across the team. Where's the organization and the business heading in the next 6 to 12 months that might require either more of what you have, i.e. you could be facing a short staffing situation, or something which you do not have. And this feeds right into that strategic business plan concept, where you look 12 months and then on a longer time horizon, 5 years into the future, and you do your best to predict what situations might arise so that you can have some sort of a framework to use to pivot off. So let's use the 12-month example. Let's say we've got a project management team. Okay, we can handle the project load now, but what does that look like 12 months from now? Do we have anything in the pipeline that means we're going to have to look at recruitment and staffing initiatives right now? Do we have people that are on contracts that are due to expire in the short term that we need to address and make permanent so that we can avoid losing someone who we've put a lot of time training and developing into? It's all these things. So this concept of knowing your enemy, whatever that is, and it can take multiple forms. What we really mean by that is a situation, knowing a threatening situation, identifying it before it arises and pivoting to defeat it. It's really important, as you can see, on all levels, to get ahead of these problems and work to solve them. It's on the broader strategic perspective, as I just discussed with the team plans, for example, and the strategic development of the workforce, and then right down to our personal level, threats to team culture, single points of failure, perhaps not conducting yourself as carefully as you should by speaking too soon to the wrong person, or not guarding your words as carefully as you should. Maybe it's not effectively identifying the skills and weaknesses that you have and need to improve on a personal level. Let's talk about that. Maybe you are aware that you don't deal with conflict very well as a leader. That is a weakness that needs to be addressed. There's two ways you can go about it. You can either ignore it or you can pivot to address it because it's a threat to your ability to deal with a situation that might arise in future. Let's play with that a little bit more. Maybe everybody in your team is an absolute dream to manage and work with right now. But what if that changes? What if you have someone, for example, external to your team that ends up giving one of your team members a hard time? Maybe not upholding the values that you and your team abide by, and so something needs to be said. Maybe you had an agreement from a contractual perspective and they violated that agreement. That could be a potential scenario, just one of several, but a potential scenario where you have to use your conflict skills, conflict resolution skills, to A, stick up for your team, B, stick up for your organisation because a contract's being violated, and get a great result. But if you have failed to foresee that that might be an issue and you haven't pivoted to meet the threat accordingly, that's something that could cause you some hurt in the future. So on all levels, guys, strategic, organizational level, and personal level, it is absolutely worthwhile scanning the radar. Okay, as a leader, you need a finely tuned radar. All right, we want to be able to see these incoming threats before they get here. And the reason that is so important, guys, is because as leaders, that is our job. Our team's working away. They're doing their day-to-day thing. They're not worried about that bigger picture stuff. That's not what we employ them for. We employ them to do the day-to-day tasks and concentrate on that. It's our job at that senior level, right, to identify potential roadblocks and remove them so that our team can continue to do their job. And what those roadblocks look like are threats. All right? And it certainly helps, as I always say, I preach on this, right? It helps to have plans and strategies in place to deal with things before they become real issues. That is our job as leaders. That is actually called path goal leadership theory, the removal of roadblocks from the path that we're seeking to take with our team, and of course removing those roadblocks because our goals might be compromised and made harder to achieve. So let's leave it there, guys. What I will do is direct your attention to the show notes, as I always do. There is a link in the show notes right at the very top, and it says send us a text. That is there so that we can promote some really good interaction between myself and you guys as the audience. You can do one of two things. You can either send me a question that you would like addressed on the show. I can read out the question, give you a shout out if you would like that. Or you can simply tell me what you find challenging about your leadership role at the moment. And perhaps again, I will address that on the show and use it to craft the show's content in a way that's beneficial to myself and, of course, to you guys as an audience. I'd love to promote that interaction between us, so please do utilize that. Bunch of other links in the show notes, guys, that I'd love you to use. There's one to the Instagram page. Jump on that if you'd like to consume some extra content in the forms of reels and posts and so on. And if you really want to step it up and get next level, we've got the LinkedIn community page. It is called the Exceptional Leadership Community of Practice. And what that does, hit that link and you will see I've created a group, and that group contains members from my network, and the idea is that we all get together in that forum and we can ask questions of each other and basically share information in a really cool collaborative fashion. And the benefit of that, of course, is that we all learn and we all get networking opportunities as well. So hit that up if you want to get next level. But until next time, guys, obviously, whatever podcast app you listen to the show on, please subscribe. Leave us a really nice review. I'd love to see some 5-star reviews start coming through. That'd be really great if you'd be so kind. But apart from that, I'll see you next time.